Okay, Chaz, we're up and rolling. Basically, why don't we just start with what's it all about and what is the impact to New York consumers on this?
Yeah, this is an initiative that Chief Judge Jonathan Lippman had announced last spring that the courts were going to be instituting. And essentially what it is it's an attempt to try and curtail a lot of these companies that buy up large amounts of old debts for pennies on the dollar and then try and recoup or pursue those debts by filing hundreds or thousands of lawsuits at once against these debtors, some of which don't know that the cases are still out there, some of which the statute of limitations may have expired, and then in doing so, some of these people are not properly served, there's not proper documentation, but most of these cases, or at least a majority of them, end in default judgments. The debtors never get served or never given notice that a court case has been brought against them, and so these debt buyers end up with judgments, which can then be used to freeze people's assets or garnish wages or things like that, and it creates a lot of trouble for a lot of consumers out there.
Now, what will have to happen for one of these suits to go forward from this point?
Well, I think there's a couple things that the Chief Judge is looking to change. One, they're going to now look for a detailed chain of ownership. You got to have some kind of affidavit or some kind of sworn statement showing who had the original debt, and then what happened to that debt from that point going forward. They sold it to whoever, and how did it eventually end up with the agency that's now filing the lawsuit. By doing that, hopefully you ensure that the debt is actually proper, that it was tied to the right person at one point, and more importantly, when a consumer gets notice that they have one of these lawsuits pending against them, they can trace it back to figure out who they actually owe money to, because what happens now is you'll get a notice of a lawsuit against you for a debt you owe, but it'll be by some company you've never heard of and for some amount of money that doesn't make sense to you because of interest, penalties, whatever else, and because the debt's been sold so many times you don't know the company, so it's hard to verify whether or not the debts are actually appropriate. So you now have a chain of custody requirement, and then the other big problem is that the majority of these cases were ending in default judgments because the debtor or the party who was claimed to be a debtor was never actually served with notice that a lawsuit had been brought against them. Either they had moved, or it had been so many years later, or the debt collectors never actually just properly served them. There's something called sewer service where you don't serve them. So now, in addition to the old way of serving the defendants by mail usually, or however they did it through these debt collection agencies, now in addition to that, the courts are going to require that a debt collector provide a stamped envelope with the claimed debtor's name and address on it, and the court will personally mail notice of that suit to them to ensure that they've gotten notice that a lawsuit's been brought against them.
So establishing this chain of ownership, is that something that you think will reduce the number of these lawsuits, or is it just designed to kind of clarify things a little bit for the consumer?
I think a combination of both. I think it will help reduce the number of lawsuits because you'll have more verifiable debt. You'll actually know whether the debt is good debt or bad debt. Do you have the right person or the wrong person? A substantial number of these are based upon incorrect information that's been bought and sold multiple times, and the bigger part of it too is, like I said, the majority of these cases end in default judgments, and whether that's because you have debtors who are just irresponsible financially and then don't go to court, or whether you have debtors who are never actually given notice of the lawsuit. It's hard to discern right now. So by the court personally sending out all of these notices, hopefully you can, one, verify the debt, and then two, also verify that the debtor has been served notice. And then, if they've been given notice and the debt is good, then there should be a judgment, and the creditor should be able to collect what is actually owed to them.